Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So on today's episode, I've got the ultimate tier ranking for you for the Commanders of 2021. Now, this tier ranking has a different kind of approach because there, well, are about 185, if I'm getting my numbers right, Commanders from 2021 that are new to Magic. And yeah, I'm not going to go through ranking every single one of them in this episode, but this episode is going to be talking about the most powerful ones. So here's how it's gonna work. Throughout the year, I have been doing tier rankings for every single set. Well, okay, except for Kaldheim, but we'll get to that here in a bit. Regardless, and in each of those sets, there were certain commanders that made it to the top tier, the S tier. So with this episode, I'm going to be taking those S-tier commanders from every set, and, you know, a couple top-tier commanders from Kaldheim as well. That would have been in the S-tier had I made a video for Kaldheim. Whoops, my apologies on that. Anyways, and comparing them to each other to see which of these S-tier commanders are the true top-tier commanders of 2021. The S-tier commanders of the S-tier, you might say. Now, with this episode, though, the slate is going to be cleared because these commanders are going to get brand new designations in comparison to each other. Again, we're going to be going from the D tier to the C tier to the B tier to the A tier and all the way up to the S tier. So, how do these top 19 commanders of 2021 compare to each other, and who is the best of the best? Well, let's jump into it to find out. Or should I say, let's jump into it after everyone blames Eddie because, again, as usual, Eddie helped me out with this episode and these rankings, and if you don't like them, well, blame Eddie. It's always Eddie's fault. It is never my fault. And now with that said, let's jump into it. So, like I mentioned, we're going to be starting things off at the bottom tier with the D tier. And again, I should mention that these commanders, just because they are in the D tier, does not mean they are bad commanders. Again, they finished in the S tier of their respective set. That means that they're incredibly powerful commanders, it's just that in comparison to other commanders in this list, well, they ended up in the lowest tier, the D tier. And just a quick note that within each of these tiers, I'm not going to be going through any particular order. Each of these commanders are essentially on the exact same level within their respective tier. Just because within a tier I bring up a commander first or last does not mean that it is better or worse. And now with all that, let's jump into the first commander of the D tier with Asmodeus the Archfiend. Asmodeus the Archfiend is a 6/6 Devil God that costs 4 black. It has Binding Contract. If you would draw a card, exile the top card of your library face down instead. And by paying black, you draw 7 cards, and by paying a black, you return all cards exiled with Asmodeus the Archfiend to their owner's hand, and you lose that much life. So this commander is basically Necropotence the commander, in a way. And yeah, of course, that is a very powerful thing. Only having to pay 3 mana to draw 7 cards is absolutely ridiculous. Now, okay, I should say that you don't get access to those cards right away, obviously, or actually any card that you draw because they get exiled instead. But of course, just by paying a single mana, then you can return all cards exiled with this commander to their owner's hand and you lose that much life. So that's kind of where the Necropotence comes in, where you're actually losing life for those cards that you are drawing. Still, like I've said before on countless episodes, 1 life for 1 card in a game like Commander where you start with 40 life is absolutely no big deal. So of course there are plenty of reasons why this commander finished in the S tier of its own set, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. And yeah, when it comes to comparing these top tier commanders, you really have to actually nitpick to actually, you know, break them out into different tiers, especially when you're going all the way down to the D tier. This commander does have a high converted mana cost and a high mana investment if you want to get the most out of it. And if this commander is dealt with and you don't have mana up to actually activate that ability to return those cards that have been exiled to your hand, well, you can just be out on a lot of cards until you can actually get the mana back to play your commander and to activate. So yeah, for all those reasons, Asmodeus the Archfiend, I'm very sorry, but you have finished in the D tier of these top tier power rankings. Next up though in the D tier, let's talk about Gralnock the Omnivore. Gralnock is a 3/3 frog that costs 2 green-blue. It has, whenever a frog you control attacks, mill 3 cards. And whenever a permanent card is put into your graveyard from your library, exile with a Croak counter on it. You may play lands and cast spells from on cards you own in exile with Croak counters on them. So Gralnock is in some ways kind of like a Muldrotha type commander. By milling or getting permanents from your library directly into your graveyard, you exile them with Croak counters on them, and then while Gralnock is in play, you have access to those permanent cards. So this obviously can give you a ton of card advantage by, in a way, essentially giving you access to your graveyard. But, you know, in a different way than Muldrotha does. Obviously, a deck built around Gralnock, though, is going to have to build with a certain type of restriction to ensure that you have enough permanents in your deck to get the most value out of it. And unlike Muldrotha, you're not getting access to those permanents when they're put into your graveyard from play. So you can't just continue to utilize certain creatures or enchantments or artifacts that can sacrifice to get in your graveyard and then again and again and again, like, you know, Steve or those types of cards. Obviously, though, while Gralnock is in play, it can provide you a ton of value, and it is an incredible commander, but in comparison to these other top commanders, it is in the D tier. Moving on, let's talk about one of my personal favorite commanders from this year with Aruth Tormented Prophet. And yes, although it is one of my favorites, it is in the D tier of these top tier commanders. Aruth is a 2/4 human wizard for 1 blue-red. She has, if you would draw a card, exile the top 2 cards of your library instead, you may play those cards this turn. Essentially, she turns each and every single one of your cards drawn into double impulse draws. So that is twice as much card advantage, which is absolutely incredible, but it is temporary card advantage now. You can do a lot of fun and very powerful things with this commander, but it is a high-risk, high-reward type of commander. You might play a spell that lets you draw 4 cards, but then you lose your hand, essentially, and now instead of drawing 4, you get temporary access to 8 cards, so yeah, for almost no mana, you get access to a ton of cards, but then you've got no hand, so you're just kind of going for broke. Then, of course, from there, you can play more ritual effects, to more draw spells, to maybe some wheels, etc., 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 and just trying to have this massive turn where you just hope it all works out, essentially. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Again, this kind of an impulse draw, double card advantage commander is, again, that high-risk, high-reward play, which I think it's really fun and spicy, but yeah, it is definitely not the top of the top tier from this year. So because of that, Aruth Tormented Prophet, you have landed into the D tier. And finally in the D tier, let's talk about yet another Izzet commander with Galazeth Prismari. Galazeth is a 3/4 Elder Dragon with flying that costs 2 blue-red. He has, when he enters the battlefield, create a treasure token, and artifacts you control have tap, add 1 mana of any one color, spend this mana only to cast an instant or sorcery spell. So in a way, Galazeth is kind of like Urza, who is like pretty much the ultimate S tier of S tiers, but kind of not. Turning all of your artifacts into mana rocks is an incredibly powerful thing, especially when this one comes into play, it just gives you essentially what is going to be a mana rock with a treasure token. And unlike Urza, these mana rocks can tap for 1 mana of any color instead of just blue, but also unlike Urza, and the actual limiting factor of this commander is that you can only use that mana for instant or sorcery spells. Now, that is still a very, 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 very powerful thing. However, it is, of course, a limiting factor that makes it so this commander is not just absolutely broken, like, you know, Urza. So, of course, you can pop out a ton of artifacts with this deck with instants and sorceries that make a lot of artifacts, like maybe a Brass's Bounty, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, you do need a decent balance in this deck of artifacts and instants and sorceries to actually make the deck function properly and to get a lot of value out of this. You know, unlike Urza, where you can just, basically take a pile of artifacts, throw it at the wall, and see what lands into your deck, and it's gonna work fine. So, Galazeth Prismari, congratulations on being an S-tier commander from Strixhaven, but Urza, you are not, so in comparison to other top commanders from this year, you are in the D tier. But now let's move on from the bottom top tier. Bottom tier? Bottom of the top tiers. Let's just go with that in the D tier, and we're moving on to the C tier. So, in comparison to all these top tier commanders, these are going to be closer to the middle of the road, but just not quite there. Anyways, we're going to be starting off with that adorable and lovely dragon god, Tiamat. Tiamat is a 7/7 with flying that costs 2 and Wooburg. When Tiamat enters the battlefield, if you cast it, you search your library for up to 5 dragon cards not named Tiamat that each have different names, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. That is an incredibly powerful effect, essentially a dragon tutor that tutors for 5 dragons, and again, since it's a 5-color commander, it can be whatever dragons you want that are legal in Commander. And actually, I just double-checked. Yeah, there aren't any banned dragons in Commander, so any dragons you want. And of course, there are plenty of, essentially game-ending dragon combinations that you can get and get them out very quickly on your next turn, or, if you've got enough mana on for the turn that you actually cast this, good for you. Maybe slap Morophon down and then just get a bunch of 5-color dragons out very quickly, and good luck to your opponents. Yeah, there's a lot of powerful things that you can do this commander, obviously. However, the limiting factor for this commander is most definitely its mana cost. Not only does it require 1 mana of each color, so you need perfect mana fixing, but it also costs 7 mana in total, which is a lot. And obviously, once you do cast this commander and tutor for those dragons, you've got to show your opponents what those dragons are, and once they see that disgusting combination of dragons that you are gonna have in your hand, they're going to try to take you out very quickly. So, in a way, this commander also kind of telegraphs your strategy. Again, a very powerful strategy, but still. So yeah, for these reasons, in comparison to the top commanders of 2021, Tiamat, you have finished in the C tier. Next up, let's talk about yet another dragon with Old Gnawbone, one that you probably will tutor for with Tiamat. It's a 7/7 dragon that costs 5 green, and it says, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. So yeah, that is gross, because green needed to ramp with treasures now too. Obviously, once things get going with this commander, you can generate an absurd amount of mana. I mean, even just with this commander hitting another player, you are getting 7 treasure tokens, which is a ton. So yeah, getting your army through and dishing out a lot of damage to make you more and more treasures, what's not to love? That being said, this commander obviously does have a high converted mana cost, again, the exact same converted mana cost as Tiamat at 7 mana. And obviously on the turn that you get this commander down, you can actually get some of that mana or all of it or even more mana back when you actually dish out damage with your creatures with this down. But still, it's a big investment and it does require your creatures to connect. So for all those reasons, Old Gnawbone, although you can be incredibly scary once you get going, you have finished in the C tier. And speaking of incredibly scary once you're set up and you get going, let's talk about Varen, Voice of Duality. Varen is a 2/2 Efreet Wizard for 1 blue-red. She has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Varen, Voice of Duality gets +1/+1 until end of turn. But more importantly, she has, if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers initial time. So just as Yarok is a Panharmonicon commander and Teysa Karlov is a Death Harmonicon commander, Varen is basically a Spell Harmonicon commander. That being said, and actually this episode's not about comparing Varen to those other two, but just a note, I don't think she's on their level. And actually, that's kind of the same reason why this finishes in the C tier and not higher in comparison to the top commanders from this year. And the reason that she's not on the same level as those is essentially, well, not a lack of support, but not nearly as much support. When it comes to Magecraft cards, or essentially other cards that basically are Magecraft, when they say whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, there are really only so many of those. Now there's a decent amount, probably around 100 or so, but it's not anywhere near the same amount as, cards that have ETBs or death triggers or leave the battlefield triggers. Now, don't get me wrong, there are still incredibly powerful things that you can do, and once you're set up and get things going, this can be absolutely absurd. But if some of those key pieces get messed with, well, you can be slowed down quite a bit. So for those reasons, Varen, the Spell Harmonicon commander, has finished in the C tier. But now let's move on to a very different kind of commander with Koma Cosmos Serpent. Koma is a 6/6 serpent that can't be countered and costs 3 green, blue, so 7 mana in total. It has, at the beginning of each upkeep, create a 3/3 blue serpent creature token named Koma's Coil. And sacrifice another Serpent, choose one, tap target permanent, its activated abilities can't be activated this turn. Or Coma Cosmos Serpent gains indestructible until end of turn. So this commander can make you an army in absolutely no time. Again, on every single upkeep, you get a 3/3, which you can then utilize to either tap things down or make it indestructible, or, you know, just keep them around because it's an army of 3/3s, which is just lovely. So this commander already has built-in protection in that it can't be countered, but you can also protect it with its tokens, or, you know, you can protect yourself from being attacked by certain creatures or tap down, keep permanents down. There's a lot that you can do with this commander. That being said, it has a very heavy mana investment at 7 mana. And it really isn't one of those commanders that can have an immediate impact. Obviously, you need to give it some time to actually build things up. So, because of these factors, Coma, you are a fantastic commander, but you have finished in the C tier in comparison to the other top commanders. Now, when it comes to a different commander, maybe I should have saved that kind of intro for Old Stick Fingers, which is a different kind of a name and a different kind of commander entirely. It's a star horror that costs X black-green. It says, when you cast this spell, reveal cards in the top of your library until you reveal X creature cards. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your graveyard, then put the rest of them on your library in a random order. Old Stick Fingers' power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Now, this commander can do some incredibly powerful and broken things. In fact, in the quick take for this commander, I highlighted essentially a 2-card combo, which this commander can essentially go get you every time, and as long as you've got a way to reanimate those pieces, you just win. Because if you build your deck in a very specific way to essentially get the exact same creatures in your graveyard every single time, and those creatures can combo, well, you can essentially just consistently win as long as you've got the right setup. Now, even with that kind of a build, obviously there is an inherent risk with this commander that, well, you are putting your pieces into your graveyard, which can get exiled by your opponents with plenty of cards out there, and if those key pieces are gone, well, then you might just lose. Now, there is more of a middle ground approach with this commander where you can build in some incredibly powerful creatures that you want to get in your graveyard for one reason or another that might not necessarily combo. So there's always that approach as well, so you're not just completely done if someone just exiles your graveyard. That being said, yeah, in the perfect scenario, this commander can combo off incredibly quickly and win you the game. But in other scenarios, you can just get your graveyard exiled and be set back a ton. So Old Stick Figures, because of all these factors, you have finished in the C tier. But now it's time for us to move away from the C tier and onto that middle-of-the-road tier with the B tier. And again, in real reality, there's nothing middle-of-the-road about these commanders because, again, they finished at the S tier of their respective sets. But again, in comparison, they are in the middle of the road compared to all these other top commanders. So just like in the last tier, let's start things off in the B tier with yet another dragon with Clouth, Unrivaled Ancient. Clouth is a 4/4 dragon with flying and haste that costs 5 red-green. It has, whenever it attacks, add X mana in any combination of colors where X is the total power of attacking creatures. Spend this mana only to cast spells. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. Now, this commander is actually very close to Old Gnawbone, but there are some slight differences. So, first up, obviously, this commander also gives you access to red, which is obviously a plus. Also, this commander can actually get you mana back right away by attacking itself because it has haste. And also, unlike Old Gnawbone, Clouth doesn't require you to actually hit your opponents, it's just based on total power when you're attacking. So you don't actually have to worry about your creatures getting through to actually get a ton of mana. Now, when it comes to a downside compared to Old Gnawbone, obviously Old Gnawbone is going to give you treasures which you can hold on to, whereas this one, yes, you can utilize the mana, but you have to utilize it before the end of your turn. So you can't save that mana for your opponent's turns or for one of your future turns. That being said, obviously it can still be an incredibly powerful commander and give you access to a ton of mana, and in my opinion, obviously it is better than Old Gnawbone, which is why I placed in the B tier, not the C tier, but it is still a B tier commander in comparison to the other top tier commanders. But now let's move on to a Simic commander with Volo Guide to Monsters. Volo is a 3/2 human wizard for 2 green-blue that says, whenever you cast a creature spell that doesn't share a creature type with a creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, copy that spell. And of course, a copy of a creature spell becomes a token. Basically, hey, double up on essentially all of your creatures. Yeah, that is going to be an incredibly powerful commander. Now, when I say all of your creatures, obviously, if you really want that to be true, you essentially have to build your deck with certain restrictions, like Eddie did, and make it so that you basically don't have any creature types that overlap at all. And of course, make sure that you keep in mind that you don't include any humans or wizards in your deck at all, because obviously Volo is a human wizard, so it won't double up on any of those spells. Again, doubling up on all of your creature spells is an incredibly powerful thing, but you need to build with that restriction in mind if you truly want to be able to double up everything. So because of that creature type restriction, it does put a nice limitation on this kind of a commander. It's still incredibly powerful and definitely one of the most powerful commanders of 2021, but it is definitely not at the top. Moving on now, let's talk about Lear, Disciple of the Drowned. Lear is a 3/4 human wizard that costs 3 blue, and it is basically unlike any other blue commander you will probably ever see, because its first line is, spells can't be countered, which is just something that I never thought I would see on a blue commander. Sure, blue players love when their own spells can't be countered, but they don't exactly like giving up control and not being able to counter their opponent's spells. Moving on from that, though, it also has each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. This is an incredibly potent commander that, yes, has a major upside, but also a major downside again. Not having any of your spells countered essentially means that, hey, on my turn I can basically do exactly what I want, and my opponents essentially are going to have a very hard time stopping me. However, again, the same can be true when your opponents are on their turns and can do some incredibly powerful things that you then can't stop because, again, you are giving up countering spells. Now, I will say that there are kind of ways around this where it's like, hey, I've got a card that ends the turn, so it's, getting spells off the stack or, spells that actually bounce spells back to the owner's hands, etc., etc., etc. There are kind of ways around countering spells, and of course, a Lear deck is going to utilize those, but still. Probably the most powerful build around this commander, though, is an extra turns type of build where you basically just want to cast extra turn after extra turn, and again, getting access to instants and sorceries in your graveyard with flashback to get those spells back again, or to cast them again from your graveyard. Yeah, you can do some very powerful things. But again, by making all spells uncounterable, it does have that limiting factor on this commander in that, well, you have to give up some control yourself and that you won't be able to stop your opponents when they are doing certain things. So for that reason, Lear, you have finished at the B tier. Moving on, let's talk about Vadrik, Astral Archmage. Vadrik is a 1/2 human wizard for 1 blue-red. He has, if it's neither day nor night, it becomes day as Vadrik, Astral Archmage enters the battlefield. Instant sorcery spells you cast cost X less to cast for X is Vadrik's power, and whenever day becomes night or night becomes day, put a +1 counter on Vadrik. Now, the day-night thing is nice with this commander, but it's not really all that necessary. It is nice just to get, extra counters on it throughout the game, but you're going to be getting his power up in other ways. And you're going to be able to get his power up incredibly quickly. Now, kind of like I mentioned before with Aruth, this is kind of like an all-in commander where you just kind of go big or go home. There are actually a decent amount of spells out there that can essentially double up his power again and again and again by giving him +X+0. And again, they're an X mana spell that gets reduced by his power because, that's what Vadrik does. So you just keep doing that again and again and again to reduce a ton of cost on all of your instant sorceries, and you can storm off and do some crazy things. That being said, again, those spells are very specific, and if you get stopped, well, you can get stopped pretty hard. Because if Vadrik is dealt with, you need to rebuild that power, and that can take some time and some cards that you might no longer have access to. But if you are unimpeded and you've got Vadrik going, well, good luck to your opponents because they're going to be taken care of in absolutely no time. So again, because of that high-risk, high-reward play that can be incredibly explosive, Vadrik, you have finished in the middle of the road at the B tier. But now let's talk about the final commander of the B tier with Oswald Fiddlebender. That's right, a mono-white commander. You never thought you'd see the day where a mono-white commander is an S tier commander at all. And yeah, I guess, okay, it's a B tier within an S tier. You know what I mean. Anyways, Oswald Fiddlebender is a 2/2 gnome artificer that costs 1 and a white, and he has magical tinkering. By paying a white and tapping, you sacrifice an artifact and search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1+ the sacrifice artifact's mana value, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle, activate only as a sorcery. So this is an incredibly low to the ground pod commander for artifacts in mono white. Being able to get artifacts out and tutor for essentially any other artifact in your deck that just costs 1 more than it, you can do some very powerful things. Now, I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning of the episode, like, I mentioned essentially on all my other tier ranking episodes. These rankings are based off of casual play. That means that the rankings for these commanders are not based off of competitive play. It is not CEDH rankings. I do not follow CEDH, so I am not sure which of these commanders are most powerful over there, and Oswald very well might be up there. Because, yeah, it's a pod commander that can tutor for the exact pieces that it needs, and I'm sure in a CEDH deck it can do this at lightning speed. That being said, in a more casual environment, it's not going to be anywhere near as fast as that, but it's still going to be very fast. So again, simply probably because of the casual limitation, Oswald Fiddlebender you have finished in the middle of the road at the B tier. And now it's time to move on from the middle of the road and take a step up to the A tier. These commanders are close to the cream of the crop. They are nearly the very top of the S tier, the S of S tier, but actually this is the A of S tier. You know what I mean. So to start things off for the A tier, let's talk about Sithis Harvest Hand. Sithis is a 1/2 nymph for green-white that has, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life and draw a card. This is an incredibly simple and effective commander that is very low to the ground. This is an enchantress that not only draws you a card, but also gains you a life, which, okay, that's just a nice little added benefit. The drawing the card's what's really important. But still, this just costs 2 mana. And of course, in these colors, there are a ton of incredibly powerful enchantments, so yeah, just get a ton of them out and take over the game. Or should I say, get even more enchantresses out, draw even more cards, play more enchantments, and keep taking over the game. So yeah, a low-to-the-ground enchantress that gives you access to the right colors, and just also happens to just pad your life total and gain you some extra life. What's not to love? And actually, in my opinion, this one is just short of the S tier, and if it wasn't for, what is actually in the S tier, which we'll get to here in a bit, it probably would have made it. And that's probably actually true for all these that are in this tier, because they are just so close to being there. And next up, we've got yet another incredibly powerful commander with Adrix and Nev Twincasters. They are a 2/2 Merfolk Wizard that have Ward 2, and they cost 2 green-blue. If 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. Hi, would you like half of Doubling Season as your commander? Oh, okay, wait, that's not good enough? Okay, let's just slap Ward 2 on it as well for pretty much no reason. So while this commander is obviously not impossible to deal with, it is harder to deal with because of that ward, making your opponents have to pay an extra 2 just to target it. And yeah, being basically the better half of the Doubling Season where it just doubles up your tokens, good luck to your opponents. Again, this counts on doubling up any and all tokens, so maybe you've got like a Spell Swindle and you double up all the treasure tokens that you make, which is just fantastic. Or, of course, creature tokens, where you double those up. Or, within creature tokens specifically, if you've got a, clone spell that, makes a clone token of something, you get twice as many, so you can just double up and double up and double up again and again and again. I mean, picture Avenger of Zendikar, which itself is scary, doubling those tokens up, and then maybe casting like Cackling Counterpart to get then 2 more Avenger of Zendikars to get more tokens and more tokens. You see where this is going. Things get absolutely crazy with this commander, and again, Ward 2, for whatever reason, was just slapped on top of this just to make it harder to deal with because, well, it somehow wasn't good enough without it. So yeah, because of this, Adrix and Nev Twincasters, you are in the A tier. Next up though, a very different kind of commander with Exodus, or okay, should I say really? Awaken the Blood Avatar. Now, Exodus is not a bad commander. The Exodus side is not a bad commander. It's a 2/4 human warlock with double strike that costs 1 white, black, black, and it has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to your hand. That is a very good effect. However, it pales in comparison to the backside of the card, which is what you're going to build the entire deck around, most likely. Because Awaken the Blood Avatar is a sorcery that costs 6 black, red. As initial cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. This spell is going to cost 2 less to cast for each creature sacrificed this way. Each opponent's going to sacrifice a creature, then you create a 3/6 black and red avatar creature token with haste, and whenever this creature attacks, it deals 3 damage to each opponent. So your commander is basically a sorcery that you can very easily cast over and over again for just 2 mana to force your opponents to sacrifice creatures to a great edict effect, and it also gives you a 3/6 that attacks and pings every opponent. So whether you're making a bunch of creature tokens or casting something like Mob Rule or Mass Mutiny to threaten your opponent's creatures, and then you sacrifice them, you can just keep casting this over and over again for 2 mana because again, you can pay off commander attacks by sacrificing creatures too. This can be very hard to stop, it can control the board, and it can take your opponents out. It's a unique commander to say the least, and a very effective one, and it has definitely earned its spot in the A tier. But now it's time to talk about the final commander of the A tier, and one that I've actually discussed at length in quite a few episodes, so I'll try to keep this short, with Tergrid, God of Fright. or in other words, Turgid God of Salt, as some people call her. She's a 4/5 god with menace that costs 3 black, and she has whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may play that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Really quickly, let's tackle the backside of this card, Turgid's Lantern, a legendary artifact for 3 and a black. Tap, target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. Pay 3 and a black, untap Turgid's Lantern. So on the backside, it's essentially, hey, do you have infinite mana? Congratulations, you win. Which really wasn't all that necessary because the front side is scary enough as it is. Basically an It That Betrays, but in your command zone, and pretty much better. Unlike It That Betrays, she doesn't cost a ton of mana, she just costs 5 mana, and she also counts your opponent's discarding cards too. So all you need to do is play Edict effects or discard effects, and you just steal your opponent's things, and you win very easily. With Turgid in play, you essentially just have to play 1 Smallpox, and that starts the ball rolling, and it's basically game over from there. Turgid, you are the God of Salt, and you have earned that title, and have also earned your spot in the A tier. But now, the moment that you've all been waiting for, let's move on from the A tier and onto the top of the top, the cream of the crop, that S tier of the S tiers. And in this tier, we have the most powerful commanders from 2021, or should I say commander, because actually, if you're counting, we've already talked about 18 commanders, and like I said at the beginning of the episode, there are 19 commanders in this episode, so there's only one commander that I have placed actually at the S tier. And that commander would be Orvar the All-Form. Orvar is a 3/3 shapeshifter with changeling that costs 3 and a blue. It has, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, if it targets one or more other permanents you control, create a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. And when a spell or ability an opponent controls causes you to discard this card, create a token that's a copy of target permanent. Now, obviously that's not going to happen all that often, but it could. Nice just to have that slapped on though. Regardless, this commander is just absolutely absurd. It essentially turns any of your instant and sorcery spells that can target into a clone effect for whatever permanent you want. I mean, with this commander, you can literally, in mono blue, land ramp more effectively than a deck that has access to green. Don't believe me? Make sure you watch the Close Quarters episode number 6, where Alec plays his Orvar deck, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Regardless, targeting your lands and getting more lands in play is just the start for this type of a commander. Because obviously you can do even more broken things. I mean, just think about, even creatures or permanents that have some fantastic ETBs that you can just abuse very easily by making more and more copies of them. I mean, there are a ton of ways to even just go accidentally infinite with this commander. The amount of value that Orvar can generate for you is incredible and absurd. And Orvar is also incredibly difficult to deal with because essentially any of your target spells are a way to pseudo-protect it. If an opponent, say, tries to Path of Exile your Orvar, you just, use one of your target spells on it, make a token copy of it. Legend rule applies, you lose your original one, but sure, now you've got your token copy of Orvar, which works the exact same. Regardless, I could go on and on about all the incredible things that Orvar can do and how it can turn some of the strangest and most out there cards in Magic into some of the best cards in its deck. But yeah, Orvar to me stands above all the other commanders from 2021, and to me, it is truly the S-tier commander among S-tier commanders. So Orvar, congratulations on earning this title. And of course, as this episode is coming to a close, I would love to hear from you. So in the comments below, make sure you let me know what your thoughts on my power tier rankings are. Did I underrate certain commanders? Did I overrate certain commanders? Or did certain commanders not even make this episode that you think should have? So yeah, let me know in the comments below. And of course, as always, thanks again and have a good one.